Now, it seems like with every Arsenal loss, the fan base implodes. And while there's definitely concerns from the Porto game, I honestly think it's overall fine. However, tactically, Porto definitely had the better hand than Arsenal, so let's have a look why they did, and just how Arsenal can counter that in the next leg in March. Now, it is to be said, European football is definitely a different ball game to Premier League football. Now, teams might not have as much individual quality, but they play different football and they are much more confident going at home. They're more likely to press you and actually try and win the ball then rather than sitting deep. In the past few games, Arsenal succeeded in finding access to between the lines. This was because they constantly created central overloads with Odegaard or Jorginho, or even Havertz and Trossard creating these chances for the team. But it was different in the Porto game. Porto did actually let Arsenal have the ball, but they defended narrowly in a 4-3-3 opposed to a 4-5-1, forcing Arsenal to play wide and direct, which is something Arsenal don't really like. This meant the three players in the midfield for Porto were actually looking to minimise the passing access to players like Havertz and Trossard and Odegaard in that midfield, and were happy for Arsenal to go out wide to Saka and Martinelli, knowing they'd be deep and not being able to create a lot. Now, this was still a risk because obviously we know the qualities that they have and they can definitely go past a few players, but their idea was that if they blocked off the middle players, even if they were to do a cross or get into a good position, there would be no one on the end of it, and it worked very well. This meant in order for any of their midfield players to actually receive the ball and be able to pick the ball up, they would have to drop a lot deeper. Odegaard in particular often interchanges, but also could drop together with White. Because of this, White could occupy and receive the ball in the right half space, moving up into that position and making players go towards Odegaard so Arsenal could try and get through it. Now, in order for Arsenal to get the midfield into positions with the ball so they could run up and get space, they often actually tried to be quite fluid in midfield, which we've seen before. They were very fluid and tried to get a lot of their midfielders to run in different positions, as in White would naturally move into the middle while Odegaard pushed up the pitch. But Porto often didn't really go out with their defensive line, and they often stayed really narrow in the game and often came closer together in the time. This forced Arsenal's attack, which got frustrated before the end of the first half, into long passes and hopeful balls out to the left and right wing. And there was many times where their pass was open to Martinelli, maybe on a 1v1 out on the left, but they weren't really accustomed to switching the ball that quickly. And often the pass never really went to where it wanted to, and they weren't very used to playing direct and very high line play. And a lot of props does have to go to Porto because they were well more drilled and well more planned out than teams that Arsenal have played recently. They understood what Arsenal were trying to do and made sure that they didn't go too aggressive and pick up the ball. The front three would often push the defenders when they felt like the players in the midfield were narrow enough to get to there or be able to cover the midfield. This stopped people like Trossard and Havertz really having any effect on the game because they just could not pick the ball up and make good passes or make good runs because Porto were blocking it off. And something that was really smart by Porto in this game is they didn't make any mistakes in this midfield because they usually actually did press the Arsenal team, especially one of the double pivots. In Porto's block, one of the centre mids, usually the right side being Pepe or Gonzalez, often stepped up to press one of Arsenal's double pivot players. At times this was Rice, at times this was other players, and this does for a brief second create access to the players between the lines so Havertz and Odegaard could get there. This is what Arsenal want. They want to be pressed quickly so they can get the ball passed out into the midfield. But Porto would do it very smartly and only have one player press, and he'd press intensely trying to win the ball back, and sometimes he did. And now even other times in the game we would have people like Martinelli even come back surprisingly to a double pivot to try and give Arsenal's midfield a bit more space, but even then he'd get pressed really intensely and often have to pass the ball back, and even when he got past the player they would rush back quickly to get into position, making sure that they got there before Arsenal could really get many players in the box or high up in the line. Now, Arsenal are very good tactically in games, so they didn't just let this happen easily. They often tried to counter this by having people like Ben White, instead of inverting all the time, actually push up on that right side in an overload position. This is taking advantage of the space the Porto are giving them out wide and try and maximise their width with the constant switches of play so they could stretch and find the space in Porto's block. And they did have success of getting up the pitch in this way. There was a lot of times where the balls actually were good and did go to the width with White or Havertz pushing out the left or right side. But when the execution weren't particularly good enough, it would often set someone like Martinelli backwards. And even though Arsenal would still retain possession in a lot of these situations, this often made a lot of the momentum go down, and Porto got back in positions and Arsenal couldn't really find the space then, having to pass it around the defence like they had to most of the game. And often these gaps just weren't open with a brilliant defensive structure. Now, this was smart because a team that is very used to switching and being able to play them balls out would be obviously very good in this situation. It would cause a lot of problems for Porto if they're a direct side, such as Porto themselves, being able to get crosses in and be able to debate the ball in the box. But because Arsenal didn't really have any of that midfield presence and didn't have a certified striker on the pitch. Trossard's coming into midfield. It meant they didn't really have a good man or someone to actually win the headers in. So when Saka did get in the box, often the best he's going to hope for is even to get a shot away or to try and get a corner. And adaptations what happened, like Raya was coming more forward on the right side to be able to switch the play to Martinelli, and he did some really good passes out to Martinelli to get him in a 1v1. But even when Martinelli had the big space that he wants and went for a 1v1, he'd go past the player and there'd just be no one in the middle for him to win the header. And Porto did a really good job to counter things that Arsenal did. Jorginho came on for Trossard to create the double pivot with Rice, and Kivior opted in the left half space. This changed the personnel, but Porto still kept disciplined. And one of the Porto midfielders would often step up to the double pivot, but would stay with Jorginho because they know how mobile he is, and they could keep him with him at all time. And often they do very good press and work around this midfield to stop him. Now there's a few ways I think Arsenal could really help in the second leg to try and get a result here. Now there was something they tried to do a few times in this game, which was put Havertz over the top, because Porto often play quite a high line. Now this is something that's going to be vital in the second leg, I feel. Dragging players away to be able to get into them spaces, and even so they might not do that. I think they might have someone like Odegaard need to come a bit deeper to be able to do them passes over the top with Havertz running. This is why I would personally play Havertz up front in that game and play Jorginho in the middle, because even if they try and do their single pivot pressing, I expect Arsenal to have a lot more progression, a lot more ball possession with the home fans, even though they had quite a lot of Porto as it would. It would also help if someone like Jesus could be playing instead, maybe to actually be that striker influence, but I think Havertz's physicality might come in key, and I think Arsenal will show a lot more intensity in the second leg, obviously being at home and the fact they need results now. I also expect Arsenal to actually start playing more people on the width in these circumstances. I think if Jorginho plays, you might see Kivior come into that left half space and play more as a winger, helping the Martinelli with the ball to try and give us the space if Porto are going to continue to give this. I always think this could be something good for Ben White on the other side, but I'd rather Odegaard operate that space with Ben White inverted behind him. Now I also expect Arteta to adapt, but I think he might think Porto might play the same, so I think he'll probably be expecting these long balls. So having better passes in the team, or having people a bit more aware of the fact they're going to have to switch it, might be something key for this game. And it might be a little contingency to actually move Martinelli a little bit more forward to try and get them passes to be a bit more easier, or having Kivior in that half space so he can always be an option to pass it to, then give the ball to Martinelli. Arsenal also need to be a lot quicker in transition when they do get the ball, and Porto are pushed up because they do like to when they have the ball. They need to be putting them balls in behind and having runners at all times. Having Saka against 3 or 4 people isn't going to help, so maybe giving the ball to other players like Martinelli on the other side, where he seems to have a bit of a free run, might be the better idea to have. And making sure people will be able to press and switch quickly is going to be very vital for the second leg. I mean, any other day Arsenal could have easily got a result in their game. If these passes were a bit better and their errors could have been minimalised, they would have been a bit better, but obviously conceding that last minute goal is poor. Arsenal will still be confident going into the home leg that they can do it, and these are some of the ways they probably can. Let me know what you guys think in the comments of the game and what Arsenal's potential chances are in this tie. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate your view as always. If you like this video, please let me know, and if you like my videos, please go and watch my video yesterday where I talk about the game in a bit of a more overall point of view. Thank you.